Hello and welcome to another video tutorial for Taz McCarthy. This one, the last part on web development for our project for the shopping cart application. So in this last one we're going to explain how to make this calculate function, which when things are selected, it will add all of the ones that are selected, put them over the right hand side, doing quantity times price, and then also adding up a subtotal. The function for this is not very long, but it does have some difficult concepts in it. So let's go through it step by step. First thing we do is make two variables for the left side and the right side divs. So back on our index page, we had a table container left, which is a div around here, and we also have a table container right, which has a div around there. As we can see, the table container right starts empty on the page. There's nothing there, it's just an empty holder, a div. So the first thing we do in our function is to select them both. So get an element by ID, table container left, table container right, and we have two variables to store that in, left side and right side. The next step is exactly what we did up here. So we make a variable called inputs, and we search the left side, not the whole document, and we get all the elements with the tag name input. We make a new variable called total price, and we set that at 0, so that's a number, and we're going to get it to add up the different items as we go along. And then what we're going to do is make this really long string that's going to have all the HTML for our finished table. All of this is going to be one string, and we're going to print it out all in one big hit, compared to the first time where we printed it out row by row. So we start this variable and we call it basket table, and because we know no matter what they've picked there's going to be certain things in the table. For instance, this heading saying my basket, and the first row of the table that's going to have the headers there, we're going to hard code that. So we have a H3 heading with my basket, and then we start the table, we start the table head, we start the row for that, and then we have several THs with our headings. So item, quantity, price, subtotal, and then we close all of the TR, the T head, and the last thing we do is we start the T body. Next thing we do is we go to loop through our array that we made with all of the inputs. So just like we did for the select all and clear all functions, we've made an array that's got this input, that input, this input, that input. It'll go through and store all of them in one go. So for our shopping cart here we have 10 items, which means the array is going to be 20 long. Okay, for each one, so starting from 0 until the end of them and going up by 1. First thing we're doing is checking the input if the type is a checkbox and that input checked is true. So as we're searching through, we're checking, is it a checkbox? So we're only interested in this one, this one, this one, this one, and so forth. So we're basically ignoring this one for now. So we're saying, is it a checkbox? Is it ticked? If it's not, it's going to skip that entire row and go to the next one. So for instance, if we run it now, it's going to skip this one because it's not a checkbox and ticked, and it's going to keep on going down until it gets to here. From this point, we're going to make a few different variables. I'm going to call one quantity. And just as we did pass an integer, which is a whole number, we're going to do pass a float, which is just a number that has decimal places. We need that here because some of our prices are $3.50, otherwise it'll be rounded to up to $4, which we don't want. So we're going to make a variable called quantity, and we're going to pass this number to be a decimal, a float, and it's going to be whatever the input's at plus 1. The reason for that is, if this is index 0 input, this one along here is going to be the next one along, number 1. If this is index number 5, this one's going to be number 6. So every time when we're trying to retrieve this number, and we're currently at this one, it's just plussing 1 to the index as it goes through the loop. So we're going to store the quantity as wherever the loop is, plus 1, the value of that. So when it gets down to this row, it's going to go, okay, the next input along is here, and it's going to store whatever this value is, whether that's a 1 or a 5 or anything else. Next thing, we're going to do a similar thing, slightly more complicated. We're going to look up the item name from our original thing here. So we're going to go back to our original my items array, except we're going to divide it by 2. Let's explain this with a practical example. If we get down to here and we count our indexes, so this is input 0, 1, 2, 3, and this one will be 4. The trouble is that if we look up number 4 from our original thing, that's going to be Rockmelon. But because we're counting 2 at a time, we're only actually up to apples, not Rockmelon. So what we need to do is to divide that by 2. Because we're counting 2 at a time, we need to do it by 2. So that's why we have x divided by 2, and then we use our function. We split that initial string and get the middle one. So if that's 0, 1, 2, we get the middle one. So we come to here and we split it and pull out just the middle name separated by the commas. So we've got the item name. Next thing, we're going to do something very similar. We're going to draw out the price. So we're going to make sure it's a floating point number, a decimal. I'm going to go back to our original list, divide it by 2 again, and we're going to split, and this time we're going to take the second bit. So if we remember that this is 0, this is 1, this is 2, we're going to take that one. And we store that as item price. The item total is going to be simply the quantity times the price. So if something's $3.50 and we've got 2 of them, it's going to be 2 times $3.50, which is 7. So we just tell it, make sure this is still a floating point number, and it's quantity times the price. And then the last thing we're going to do, we started our total price here, it starts at 0. We're going to add on our freshly calculated quantity times price. And we have this symbol here, plus equals. That's exactly the same as typing out total price equals total price plus the new value. So instead of having to type out all of that code, we can just say plus equals, and all it means is take what's already there and add on whatever we tell it. So it's going to add on whatever it just added up. The last thing we do is in the same way, we started our big basket table string here where we're encoding line by line the table. We're going to add to that. So we set up a table row, and then a TD with the item name, another TD with the quantity, another one with the item price, and the last one with the item total. We've put in some little dollar signs there. So this is going to loop through all of the ones that they've ticked, and it's going to add that row of data. Just like that. When the for loop is finished, we're going to add one more line of data to the end, and that's a row with the total price. So basket table equals one more TR, and then we'll have a TD with a colon span of 3. Because on here we want this total to go 3 across, we just tell it that, col span equals 3. And then we have the word total, and then we start our last TD, and then we just put in our total price variable, which we had started at 0 and been adding item totals onto as we went. Make sure you remember to close the TR, close the T-body, close the table. At this stage, if we were to ignore this last line of code and look at just the string, which we can test by saying alert basket table. So we'll have a pop-up box with this string that we've been making. We'll test that now. So reload the page, add a few things in, calculate. So we can see the code that we've wanted being added up line by line. At the start we have our H3 and all of the table header as we set up on this line, and then it's gone through all of the inputs, checking to see which ones are ticked, and then drawing out the quantity, and then from the original array the name and the price of the item. We can see that it's done that for broccoli, and it found out there was one of them for $1.50, so the total price is $1.50, and then it found that we ticked the zucchini, and so forth, going through to rockmelon. The last command we do is really short but really powerful. And you remember at the start we selected the right side div. We can instantly change any content inside that with dot in a HTML. Notice the capitals on the HTML. And all we do is assign the inside of that div. So looking back here, remember when the page starts it's empty. So when we say inner HTML, this is the inner section here, so whatever we tell it to put in there, it's going to type in straight there for us as if we typed it originally on the page, except it does it dynamically. So all we do is to say that big string with all of the table, to put that inside the right hand side div, and it should work for us very nicely. So let's refresh the page. Firstly, our functions, we've got our tick to automatically change the quantity and untick to change it back to 0. We've got our select all, which ticks them all, changes all the quantities to 1. We've got our clear all, which does the opposite. And finally we have our calculate, which makes a big string with our H3, a table header, and then checking these inputs and line by line adding the data that's needed, adding up the prices as we go, and giving us our total. So by doing this we have a receipt type of system. If they want to update anything, they can simply come over to the side, click calculate, and you can see it's instantly updated. Even though it is rewriting this whole thing again, it happens very fast, so it's not very obvious that that's happening.